China is a vast country with a huge population where every day brings strange and extraordinary events. Hi, I'm Andy. The stories I share with you are real cases that have happened around me over the past few decades, real people, real events, real stories. Many of these cases have become historical mysteries that remain unsolved. The stories are so bizarre and fascinating that you wouldn't stop listening. Some of these incidents are deeply rooted in Chinese culture and might be hard to understand, but don't worry, I'll explain them as we go along. Now, I'm sitting right beside the fireplace in my living room. It's late at night, and it's raining outside. The sound of the rain is relaxing. If you drift off to sleep before finishing the whole story, sweet dreams to you. Today, I'm going to share the first episode from the Unsolved Mysteries I've Known Over the Past 30 Years series with you. This story was told to me by a classmate. Her father was the head of security at the place where the incident happened, so he was involved in the entire thing from start to finish. We used to listen to her tell the story in our dorm after lights out, and it scared us so much we had nightmares. Thinking back, it's been 30 years, and the legal prosecution period should have expired. I'm curious who the killer was. Maybe one day, we'll pass by him on the street without even knowing it. The incident happened in early 1985, just after New Year's Day, in a dormitory building of an organization in a northern Chinese city. This was where my classmate's father worked. The organization was a national research institute with over 3,000 employees, a large-scale institution. The institute itself covered a vast area, with a large residential complex behind it. The bus stop near the institute was even named Research Institute, showing how big it was. Let me briefly describe the victim's family. His father was the deputy director of the Research Institute, and his mother was the office director there. They were influential figures in the institute, with many people trying to curry favor with them. Both were in their early 50s and had a son and a daughter. The daughter was married and no longer lived with them, while the son was in his senior year of college. If all went well, he would graduate in the summer of 1985 and had already secured a job. In China, it's common for people with power to use their influence and social network to arrange good jobs for their children or relatives. The young man also had a girlfriend in school, and both families had met, planning to marry next year. The deputy director, who was in charge of housing allocation, had already arranged a house for his son, which was no secret in the institute. The incident occurred on a Saturday. Back then, people only had Sundays off in China, so they still worked on Saturdays. January in the north was particularly cold. The institute's lunch break was from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Most people lived nearby and would get lunch from the institute's canteen, heat it at home, and rest before returning to work. My classmate's father did the same and was accompanied by the office director, the victim's mother. Due to the cold weather, they jogged to the building. The deputy director lived on the 3rd floor, while my classmate's father lived on the 5th floor. When they reached the 3rd floor, he said goodbye to her and continued upstairs. He had just taken a few steps when he heard her anxiously say, "Why can't I push the door open?" She knocked and called her son's nickname, Wei Wei. "Wei Wei, are you there? Open the door." The office director was a petite southern woman and couldn't push the door open. My classmate's father put down his lunchbox to help. He managed to open the door slightly, and a pungent smell hit them. Forcing the door open further, he saw a pool of blood on the floor. My classmate's father, experienced in security, immediately sensed danger, but the office director, not as wary, entered through the gap and immediately screamed, collapsing into the pool of blood. The noise was heard by neighbors, as the building housed mostly institute leaders or senior researchers. In 1985, having a telephone was a status symbol, and nearly every household in the building had one. My classmate's father, not daring to enter, asked the neighbor to call the police. Time seemed to drag on endlessly, but eventually, the police arrived. The scene was largely undisturbed except for the victim's mother, who had entered. Then came the investigation. My classmate's father, familiar with the staff, led a few police officers to visit the residents door to door. By the next afternoon, the police held a briefing at the institute. The city took this case very seriously. It was near the new year, and a major murder case could destabilize the community. The Chinese government is always very sensitive to social stability. Additionally, this research institute was a national level one, and the director's position was equivalent to the mayor's, both being vice-ministerial level. In China, people at this high rank are powerful and influential, so they are taken much more seriously than ordinary people. As a result, the police established a task force, and my classmate's father was part of it. They classified the case as intentional homicide. Based on the scene, the deputy director's house was a 3-bedroom apartment, and the murderer's activity area was limited to the living room and bathroom. The other rooms were untouched, and nothing was stolen, not even the 300 yuan in cash left in plain sight. The killer's intention was clear: murder, not theft. However, no valuable clues were found at the scene, no footprints or fingerprints. The door handles had been carefully and thoroughly wiped. The only potential clues were 2 boxes of pastries and an apple basket. The pastries weren't there in the morning, and the apple basket belonged to the family but had new apples in it. It was figured that the killer used the guise of delivering a gift to gain entry, placed the pastry boxes on the entry table, and asked the young man to find a basket for the apples. While he was bent over, the killer attacked. Although the forensic results weren't out yet, the criminal police officers with years of experience could tell right away that it was caused by a blunt object. The deputy director's son was only 172 centimeters tall and not very strong, so the murderer must have been very strong. In other words, with the first blow, the young man was already unconscious. No one around heard any screams or any other strange noises. It's important to note that the deputy director's neighbor had 2 elderly people at home. If there had been any sound, they would have definitely heard it. Moreover, the criminal police analyzed that the murderer put the apples in a large bag, changed out of his blood-stained clothes after killing the victim, and took them away along with the murder weapon in the bag. A few days later, the police officers who interviewed the residents finally collected a somewhat valuable clue. An old lady from the building opposite seemed to have seen the murderer on the morning of the incident. Her balcony faced the entrance of the building where the crime happened. That morning, she was cleaning the balcony when she accidentally looked up. Since it was exceptionally cold that day, no one was downstairs. At that moment, a man wearing a blue cotton coat and a Ushanka hat appeared in her sight. The key point was that he was holding 2 boxes of pastries in his left hand and a very large cloth bag in his right hand. The old lady also remembered the exact time very clearly because when she saw the man enter the building, the radio at home happened to be reporting the time at 10 o'clock sharp. Since the building opposite housed the deputy director in charge of housing allocation, the old lady even murmured to herself, "Someone is even coming to deliver gifts on such a cold day." Because she was very sure that the man had walked there, the police officers went to the buses that passed by to inquire, and another team went to investigate the pastry shops. However, there were still some doubts about the case. If the boy died at that time, how could it be explained that his last position was with his head against the door? In that case, the murderer himself couldn't get out either. So, there was also a theory that the victim wasn't dead at that time. After the murderer left, the young man tried to save himself. Because he fell very close to the door, he wanted to crawl to the door to open it and call for help, but he was too weak and eventually failed. This would also explain why his head was finally facing the door. The police officers who went to the bus company didn't find anything. Neither the driver nor the ticket seller had any impression of him. Moreover, the weather was very cold that day, and there were very few people going out, so there weren't many people on the bus. If there had been someone with such big bags, they would have remembered him. But there wasn't. The police officers who went to the pastry shops also came back empty-handed. It was near the new year, so there were naturally many people buying pastries. Besides, the murderer wouldn't necessarily buy them himself. Therefore, they didn't get any leads. Furthermore, based on the old lady's description, the murderer was of average height, around 172 to 176 centimeters, and on the thin side. Other than that, they knew nothing. So, with this vague information, the police officers turned to my classmate's father to understand the internal situation of the research institute. From the various signs of the crime, it seemed the murderer was quite familiar with the research institute. Coupled with the fact that the victim's father was the deputy director in charge of housing allocation, the motive was clearly revenge killing. They looked into whether there was anyone within the institute who shared a physical description similar to the murderer's and had a motive for the crime. Several people from the task force analyzed the case with the security department. The main task was for the security department to provide a list of suspicious people, which the police officers would then analyze and eliminate one by one. Naturally, people who had argued or fought with the deputy director were prime suspects. Later, they did find someone who fit the profile, a man named Wang who worked as a janitor in the institute's buildings. He was in his 40s, had 2 children, and his family had never been allocated an apartment. They lived in a small 12-square-meter room provided by the institute. He had a son and a daughter, both 15 or 16 years old, and living together wasn't convenient. Logically, he should have been allocated an apartment, but logic doesn't always prevail. He fit the physical description of the murderer and had admitted to arguing with the deputy director, even resorting to physical violence before being pulled apart by others. He had a motive. His janitorial work usually ended after 9 a.m., allowing him time to go home, change clothes, grab his things, commit the crime, and return. An hour was enough. The police decided to confront Wang. Wang admitted that he deeply resented the deputy director. He had been working at the institute for 20 years and still hadn't been allocated an apartment. He felt it was because he wasn't originally from the institute but had transferred from somewhere else. He believed he was being treated unfairly. At the time of the incident, Wang claimed he went to sleep in their janitorial office after finishing his cleaning duties. He had no alibi, but he denied killing anyone. He said that even though he hated the deputy director, his wife didn't work, and if he killed someone, he would have to pay with his life. What would happen to his wife and children then? Although his reasoning made sense, the lack of a time alibi kept him as a prime suspect. He had a strong motive, but having a motive doesn't necessarily translate into action. At this point, the task force identified another suspect. This one was a draftsman at the institute, 174 centimeters tall and on the thin side. He was a high school graduate from another city who had been assigned to work at the institute after being admitted to a local vocational school. He was now 33 years old. They suspected him because of housing issues as well. Being from another city, he lived in the institute's dormitory. He later started dating a girl, but the relationship ended because he couldn't get an apartment. In China, it's essential for a couple to have their own home before getting married, and it's usually the man's responsibility. The draftsman went through a few more girlfriends, and each time, the relationship failed due to the lack of housing. Once, he got drunk and threatened to smash the deputy director's head with a bottle. They also had a rather bizarre reason for suspecting him. There were apples at the crime scene, and this man's hometown produced apples. He had even given apples to the deputy director before. So, he had a motive. Not being able to get an apartment led to him being single. He had the time. He disappeared for a while in the morning, claiming he got a terrible stomachache and needed to use the restroom, but lacked a witness, and he had the opportunity. He had been to the deputy director's house before and could easily trick his son into opening the door. The police questioned him again, but after some investigation, they found out that he genuinely had a bad stomach and had even gotten medication from the institute's medical office. He had taken a leave of absence to go to the hospital, and everyone in his office knew about his stomach troubles. He was only gone for half an hour, which wouldn't have been enough time to commit murder and return. So, he was ruled out as a suspect. At first glance, there seemed to be a lot of suspicious people, but upon closer examination, none of them seemed to be the culprit. The task force then questioned whether their investigation might be going in the wrong direction. They had been focusing solely on the deputy director, but perhaps the victim had enemies at school. You know how it is with young people, relationship problems and all that. So, they went back to the victim's school to dig deeper, but the results were disappointing. The young man had a cheerful personality and didn't have any real enemies. Sure, There were some minor arguments here and there, but they were just young folks. With graduation around the corner, everyone was busy securing jobs. Who would have the time or energy to do something like this? There were no issues with his girlfriend either. For a while, the task force was stuck without a direction. As the new year approached, the case was put on hold. However, for the people living in that building, it wasn't a good new year at all. After the deputy director's family got into trouble, they were relocated by the institute to another place. The police had put a seal on their door. At night, it was pitch dark outside, and anyone going up the stairs would feel their heart pounding when passing the 3rd floor. The other 2 households on the 3rd floor were so scared they couldn't sleep well at night, especially since the case hadn't been solved yet. They really couldn't feel at ease. After the new year, the task force left the institute, but they still kept in touch with my classmate's father over the phone. This time, the police started suspecting the victim's older sister. They heard from people during their investigation that the parents favored boys over girls, and the sister had no status in the family. While the locals' gossip seemed plausible, after all, she was his sister. Besides, how could a woman kill a man? Then they suspected the brother-in-law, but he had an alibi. The case stalled. The deputy director and his wife were devastated by the tragedy. They seemed like different people. The wife took early retirement, and although the husband didn't retire, he barely worked anymore, just collecting his salary as usual. Eventually, the couple returned to their hometown in the south. The story seemed to end there. But just when everyone had pretty much forgotten about the case, which was around 1998, my classmate's father unexpectedly bumped into a retired detective who had worked on the case back in the day. This detective had been retired for many years. They were happy to see each other and decided to grab a meal together. Over the meal, and after having quite a few drinks, the old detective opened up to my classmate's father. He said that nearly 10 years after the case, just as he was nearing retirement, he was called in by his department to discuss the situation. The reason was an anonymous tip letter received by the police regarding the 1985 case. The letter claimed that the mastermind behind the murder was the director of the research institute at the time, and the murderer was a hired hitman. The person who knew the most about the entire incident was the director's brother-in-law, who was an inconspicuous electrician at the institute. It was said that this brother-in-law was responsible for contacting and arranging the hitman. Wanting to close this old case, the police asked the old detective to look into it. If the claims in the tip letter seemed credible, he was to lead a small team of young officers to investigate further. So, they secretly investigated the brother-in-law of the director. They found that he seemed to be an honest man, not the kind who would know a hitman. The director had already passed away, and the deputy director had moved to his southern hometown and couldn't be reached. In the end, the old detective said that from what he could gather, it was likely that the innocent young man who died was a victim of internal power struggles within the institute. But there were just no clues or evidence to prove anything. And so, it had to be left at that. The next story is about a true case I once heard. It's not an unsolved mystery, but it is really strange. This happened way back in 1971 in a state-run munitions factory nestled in a valley in the Zhongtial Mountains of Shanxi. At that time, these factories were built deep in the mountains for secrecy and safety. Despite the Cultural Revolution launched by Chinese leader Mao, which threw many Chinese cities into political and social turmoil, the factory was quite isolated and had strict management, so it remained peaceful. However, just as autumn was approaching, a worker from one of the workshops went missing. In a munitions factory, a missing person is a big deal. They started by mobilizing all the workers to search, but found nothing. This worker was from Shijiazhuang, the capital city of Hebei province, so they called his local government office to check, but everything was normal there, no sign of him returning home. With no other options, they had to report it to the authorities. Around this time, the chimney of the factory's largest canteen got blocked. This canteen was one of 3 in the factory, with a chimney that stood dozens of meters high. While cleaning it, they found a body. It was a male, with multiple fractures all over. Since there was no DNA technology available back then, they identified him by his height, clothes, and wristwatch. It was the missing worker. The next question was how to classify this death. Suicide? The worker, a young 19-year-old who actively participated in cultural activities, was good at singing revolutionary opera, a popular form of theatre during the Cultural Revolution, and had a cheerful personality. His dorm mate said he was acting normal before he disappeared, with no signs of depression. As for relationships, he hadn't even started dating. He was a clean slate, as they put it. If it wasn't suicide, could it be murder then? But what would be the motive? He was just an ordinary worker, not involved in any power struggles or love affairs. Plus, his manner of death was baffling. The coroner concluded he fell from a great height, meaning he fell from the chimney. If the murderer had killed him first and then carried him up the chimney to throw him down, how could they manage that? The police even did an experiment, asking the strongest man in the factory to carry someone of similar size and weight up the ladder. He couldn't even make it up 5 rungs. Moreover, carrying a living person would allow them to assist you to some extent, while a dead weight would only get heavier. If the murderer tricked him into climbing up and then pushed him, that wouldn't work either. The ladder could only fit one person at a time. The person behind couldn't push the one ahead. Plus, this munitions factory was deep in the mountains. If someone wanted to dispose of a body, they could just throw it in a random valley where no one would find it. Why bother with the chimney, which would eventually get blocked and discovered? So, if suicide and murder were both ruled out, how do we explain him falling from the chimney? The worker's family came and refused to believe it was suicide, insisting it was murder. But there wasn't enough evidence for either. In the end, the police concluded it was an accident. Maybe the young man got curious, climbed the chimney for fun, and accidentally fell. That was the only explanation that made sense. Life had a different pace back then, so his family accepted the result, gathered his belongings, and went home. Since then, I sometimes glance at tall chimneys when I pass by, imagining a young man climbing up one night, maybe just to see the world from up there. Or maybe he was tricked by someone with malicious intent. The truth remains lost in the smoke. I've always been fascinated by real-life crime stories, and I love delving into the intriguing details of these cases whenever I get the chance. The story I'm about to share next isn't a suspenseful mystery or an unsolved case, it's rather simple yet amusing. Nowadays, China is all about fan culture. Every celebrity competes to see who has more fans, and the grudges between stars often lead to heated arguments among their fans. The story I'm sharing today happened in the early 80s, triggered by a fan. Back then, China was just recovering from the social upheaval of the Cultural Revolution and gradually returning to normal. The concept of fandom was still in its early stages, and celebrities were just beginning to gain recognition and popularity. Although people didn't call them celebrities at the time, you could already find people quietly selling photos of stars on the street, both domestic and international. Our story revolves around a female fan from Shanghai who was smitten with a star player on the Chinese men's volleyball team, Wang. Wang was not only incredibly handsome and athletic, but also possessed a charming personality that captivated the hearts of many female fans. So whenever there was a domestic match, there were far more female spectators than male ones. However, this particular fan, aware of her own limitations and the vast gap between her and the famous athlete, decided to take an unconventional approach to express her admiration. At the time, the Shanghai Film Studio was home to some of China's most celebrated actresses, and one of these actresses was particularly adored by the public. Inspired by her popularity, the fan decided to impersonate the actress to connect with Wang. She purchased a photo of the actress from the street and even cut out her image from the cover of the magazine Popular Movies. Under the actress's assumed name, she crafted a heartfelt letter to the volleyball star, pouring out her admiration for him. In the 80s, communication was mainly through letters. Although the actress's letter didn't use any lovey-dovey words, you could still sense her admiration for Wang between the lines. Intrigued by this unexpected correspondence from a seemingly famous actress, Wang responded to the letter, and the two began exchanging messages. Wang, in his innocence, believed he was corresponding with the real actress, unaware of the elaborate ruse. As their virtual relationship progressed, Wang even shared his personal phone number with the fan, hoping to take their connection to the next level. However, the fan, still maintaining the actress's persona, explained that her busy filming schedule made it difficult for her to make phone calls. She suggested that they continue communicating through letters and expressed her willingness to meet Wang in person if she ever visited Beijing. Later, Wang's boss found out and was very supportive of their relationship, even calling the Shanghai Film Studio's leadership. That call exposed the truth. To their surprise, the studio officials revealed that the actress had been married for nearly a year and couldn't be writing love letters to an athlete. They even brought in the actress to clear things up, confirming that Wang had been duped. The authorities, determined to unravel the mystery behind this deception, traced the letters back to a P.O. box. At that time, individuals could rent a P.O. box at the post office with a certificate from their workplace, paying a small monthly fee. By cross-referencing the box's rental records with employment records, they easily identified the culprit, a young female worker in her early 20s. She had told her workplace that she was studying and needed to receive study materials by mail, so she obtained a unit certificate to rent the P.O. box. When confronted, the fan confessed to her actions. She explained that she had used the actress's name and image to gain Wang's attention, as she felt her own identity was inadequate to capture his interest. While this incident might seem like a harmless prank in today's world, it held more significance in the early 1980s, when China was still in its early stages of economic development. The gifts Wang had sent the fan from his overseas matches were considered valuable, and her actions were deemed fraudulent. Consequently, she was charged with fraud and sentenced to prison, probably for about 4 years, if I remember correctly. Later, the actress and the athlete met at a gathering in Beijing, but both felt a bit awkward. Wang eventually went to Japan to pursue his volleyball career, while the actress embarked on a journey of self-discovery in the United States. People at the time thought they were an ideal match, but it wasn't meant to be. The awkwardness when they met was because Wang had really liked the actress back then, otherwise, he wouldn't have written back. It was a one-sided affection. The sad part is that the actress later divorced her husband and remained single. In terms of appearance, many felt they were well-matched. Even though they went their separate ways, their story is a fun reminder of how young love can be both silly and powerful. It's like one of those tales that just drift along, like a warm summer breeze that makes you feel sleepy. Maybe in your dreams, you'll imagine a different ending for the athlete and the actress, where they find their way back to each other under better circumstances. Let me share another story with you. I once knew a medical student named Lin, who was in her final year at the university. Around a semester before graduation, she vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and eerie clues. Lin's last known whereabouts were on June 5, 2006. As the end of the semester approached, students were feeling the pressure, and they decided to unwind with a gathering at a nearby bar. Over 40 people attended the party, including professors and students. They spent the evening chatting, drinking, and having fun, the party lasting until 2 a.m. on June 6th. As the party ended, one of the students, named Kim, offered to walk Lin home. Lin agreed. Kim had been secretly harboring feelings for Lin for quite some time, and it was no secret among their classmates. The bar where the party took place wasn't too far from Lin's apartment, a 20-minute walk. Kim walked Lin home and then left. Strangely, Lin didn't show up for classes for the next 3 days. For a diligent student like her, skipping classes was unheard of. In the days leading up to the party, Lin had been mugged by a group of thieves on a motorcycle, losing her phone, textbooks, and ID. Unable to reach Lin, Kim and their classmates decided to check on her at her apartment. They knocked repeatedly, but no one answered. The only sound was Lin's small dog barking frantically inside. One of them even went to the apartment building across the street and peered into Lin's window, seeing clutter, shoes, and other items scattered all over the floor. They contacted Lin's parents, only to learn that she hadn't gone home either. By now, a sense of dread had settled over them. They reported Lynn's disappearance to the police. Upon arrival, the police forcibly broke into the apartment. While the place was in disarray, there were no signs of a struggle. Additionally, one of Lynn's classmates recognized her backpack from the party, which was still in the apartment. Based on this, the police initially assumed that Lynn had gone out again after returning home and couldn't immediately classify it as a missing person case. Their conclusion seemed hasty, and they kept emphasizing that she was probably fine. Lynn's parents and sister, upon hearing the news, decided to travel to the city to look for her. To prepare for their arrival, Lynn's classmates, in their misguided attempt to help, decided to clean up the crime scene. This proved to be a disastrous move. By the time they realized Lynn might be in danger, it was too late. All fingerprints, DNA, and other crucial evidence had been wiped away. Even during the cleanup, some of the classmates noticed inconsistencies. First, there was a bouquet of dried flowers scattered on the floor. A friend had given these flowers to Lynn, and she had hung them high up to protect them from her dog. But now they were on the ground, suggesting a forceful impact. Second, someone noticed dirty laundry still in the washing machine, left there for several days, with an unpleasant odor. Why would someone planning to be away for days leave their laundry unattended, let alone their dog? Meanwhile, Lynn's father, distraught over his daughter's disappearance, spent every day searching the area around her apartment. One day, he stumbled upon a table in a dumpster. He immediately recognized it as the coffee table he had bought for his daughter. But upon closer inspection, he found that all four legs had been removed, leaving only the tabletop. Lynn's father immediately reported this clue to the police. Upon questioning, one of Lynn's female classmates recognized the table. She had visited Lynn's apartment the day before her disappearance and remembered seeing the table clearly. However, when they cleaned up Lynn's apartment after reporting her missing, they didn't find the table. The classmates concluded that the table had likely disappeared with Lynn on the night she vanished. In addition to the table, the police discovered a toolbox missing a hammer from Lynn's room. Could someone have entered Lynn's apartment after she returned home, leading to an argument, murder, and the disposal of her body? The cleaned-up crime scene made it impossible to find any valuable clues. The investigation shifted to Lynn's computer. They discovered she had returned home around 2:30 a.m. on June 6. Strangely, at 2:59 a.m., the computer showed browsing activity. The websites visited were peculiar, emergency services numbers like 911, the equivalent in the story's location, and inquiries like "Does groping count as sexual harassment?" The odd part was that the browsing only lasted 3 minutes. By 3:02 a.m., the computer went idle, then forcefully shut down at 4:21 a.m. Based on this, some speculated that perhaps someone at the party had harassed Lynn. Upon returning home, she might have used the computer to research her options and fight for herself. But the mystery deepened. Why did someone delete the browsing history except for those initial searches? Was it a deliberate attempt to mislead the investigation? Things got even stranger. For days after Lynn's disappearance, on June 10th, the police discovered someone accessed a music website and checked emails using Lynn's account from a hotel. However, hotel security footage revealed no suspicious individuals matching Lynn's description. The most unsettling clue came from Lynn's medical school. As part of their curriculum, the veterinary department regularly cremated animal remains, typically around 40 kilograms per week. But in the week Lynn vanished, the weight jumped to a staggering 110 kilograms. Where did this additional 70 kilograms come from? The school confirmed no large animals were dissected that week. Unfortunately, since the remains were already incinerated, any analysis to determine if Lynn's remains were part of the mix was impossible. With these incomplete and unsettling clues, the case remains unsolved for almost 20 years. There haven't been any major breakthroughs, leaving a lingering sense of unease and unanswered questions. Lynn's case got me thinking about the famous Eliza Lam disappearance. It's one of those weird and controversial stories. This all took place in 2013. Eliza, who was 21, traveled alone to the US. She called her parents every day, but on January the 31st, she went silent. Her parents got worried and called the LA police. The cops checked her hotel, but found nothing. She was officially missing. Then the police released some creepy footage of her last moments in the hotel. It went viral because it was so bizarre, reminding folks of the 1947 Black Dahlia case, where actress Elizabeth Short was found murdered near the same Cecil Hotel where Eliza vanished. The Cecil Hotel, opened in 1927, had a shady rep, full of strange deaths and sketchy people. Eliza booked a room there without telling her parents. When they found out, they warned her, but she insisted. She checked in on January the 28th, and by the 31st, she was off the grid. The cops checked the footage and saw nothing odd in the first few days. She mostly stayed in her room, only going out for meals. The last time she left her room was January the 31st. The police then reviewed the elevator footage from that day. In the 4-minute clip, Eliza walks into the elevator, presses all the buttons, and stands in the corner as the door stays open. Weird, right? She peeks out, like she's checking if someone's there. Then, she steps out and makes these strange hand gestures. After about 15 seconds, she vanishes from the camera's view, and the elevator finally closes. The police had 100 minutes of footage, but only shared 4 to protect her privacy. After her parents reported her missing, the police combed the hotel, but found nothing. Eliza wasn't in her room or anywhere else. How did she disappear? Neighbors reported arguments and water flooding downstairs, probably from a blocked pipe. The police decided to check the rooftop water tanks. The hotel staff said the door to the rooftop was locked and only the manager had the key. The manager was in the lobby the whole time Eliza was missing, so it seemed impossible for anyone to have taken her up there. The police dropped this lead. In February 2013, guests complained about the tap water tasting weird and getting worse, even making some people sick. On February 14th, hotel staff checked the rooftop water tanks. When they opened one, a horrible smell hit them, and they found a woman's body floating inside. The police later identified the body as Eliza Lamb. They started investigating her death. For months later, the autopsy showed no signs of physical trauma, meaning she drowned. But Eliza's parents and the public couldn't accept this explanation. There are several unanswered questions. How did Eliza get to the rooftop water tanks with the locked door? Why did the elevator door stay open so long when she entered and only close after she left? Was someone holding it open? Eliza's behavior in the elevator didn't match her mental health history. How to explain it? Why were her clothes missing? Eventually, more clues came out. The rooftop door, thought to be locked, was actually easy to open, and there were 2 other ways to the rooftop, an external fire escape and a window on the 14th floor near the elevator. The elevator stayed open because Eliza pressed the door hold button, meant for cleaning staff. Eliza had severe bipolar disorder and stopped taking her meds before her trip, hoping to overcome her condition through travel. Her belongings included bipolar disorder medication, with enough missing to suggest she hadn't taken it for a while, leading to her strange behavior. She experienced paradoxical undressing, a symptom of severe hypothermia, explaining why her clothes were found clogging the water tank outlet, causing water pressure issues. This case remains a mystery, with a young life tragically lost. Mental health needs family support and proper treatment to overcome its challenges. Alright, here's another story. It's not exactly a cold case, but it's definitely interesting. I can't remember where I first heard it, but the details are pretty clear in my mind. So, there was this woman who was secretly seeing someone behind her husband's back. One day, the husband went away on a business trip and the woman, seeing her chance, invited her lover over. Somehow, they ended up fighting and the lover accidentally killed her. Freaked out, he hid her body in an old wooden chest that hadn't been used in ages. A bit later, the husband came back. When he didn't see his wife at home, he just assumed she'd gone to her parents' place. He went about his usual routine, eating and sleeping, totally clueless that his wife's body was in that chest. After a couple of days, the neighbors dropped by, complaining about a weird smell coming from the house. Everyone pitched in to find the source, and eventually, they found the body in the chest. The coroner gave a quick rundown to the police. Since it was early winter, the body hadn't decomposed much yet, but it was starting to bloat. The arms had turned dark brown from livor mortis, and when touched, fluid started oozing out, like sweet juice from a lotus root. Because of that, the case got the nickname Sweet Juice Lotus Root. For a long time after, the cops working on the case felt sick every time they saw honey-glazed lotus root. So, yeah, it's a creepy story about a woman with a lover, a fight that led to her accidental death, and a body hidden in a chest. The husband didn't realize until the smell gave it away, and the case's nickname came from the gruesome state of the body. Pretty eerie, but the nickname adds a weird twist. Let's wrap things up with a mystery story today. It's a personal one, as it happened to my classmate's family when we were in elementary school. I was young at the time, so I don't remember everything clearly. However, among the few unsolved cases I know, this one, where the person is neither alive nor dead, is quite rare. The victim was my classmate's aunt. She was in her early 30s when it happened. She graduated from a prestigious university with a degree in finance and worked as an accountant at a medium-sized state-owned enterprise. She quickly rose to become the head of the finance department before turning 30. My classmates' other family members were mostly junior high or vocational school graduates working as laborers, so his aunt was considered the most accomplished. Her family was proud of her. She even traveled abroad with company leaders and often brought back gifts for my classmate, which made us all envious. The incident occurred on a winter night. Since she was the head of the finance department, their house had a telephone. As I mentioned previously, telephones were a symbol of status in China back then. She was married, and her husband had put their child to bed and gone to sleep himself. Her husband was woken up by the phone ringing. Half asleep, he heard his wife say good before hanging up. She then came into the bedroom and told him there was an emergency at work and she had to go out. It was just past 11 at night, not even half past, when he asked if he should accompany her. The office wasn't far from their place, just a 20-minute walk. But the main thing was, it was winter and pitch dark outside. A single woman walking alone wouldn't be safe. But she said no, explaining that the company had sent a car to pick her up. So she got dressed and left, and never came back. The next day, her husband went to work at the same company. When her colleagues asked why she hadn't come to work, he was shocked and said, "Didn't you call her last night for an emergency?" But everyone, from the leaders to the financial staff, said they had not made the call. Moreover, all their cars had been in the garage that night, as confirmed by the on-duty staff. So where did she go? The company reported the case to the police. Initially, they suspected her husband since he was the last person to see her, and his account lacked corroboration. My classmate's aunt's marriage was unusual. She was highly educated, while her husband hadn't even finished junior high school and worked as a laborer. Though she was talented, she was not considered attractive, while her husband was quite handsome. The police thought he might have killed her to be with someone else, but after investigation, they found he was mostly a coward who relied on his wife for career advancement. Without her, he wouldn't have known how to get along at work, reducing suspicion against him. The key clue was the phone call. Although there was no caller ID at the time, the police could trace it internally through the telephone exchange. It turned out the call was made from her workplace. They questioned the night shift staff again, but they all insisted that no one had entered the office building after hours. The night was dark, and turning on the lights would have been necessary to make a call. There were no surveillance cameras, and at 11 p.m. on a winter night, there would have been no one outside. My aunt had said the company would send a car to pick her up, which meant she wouldn't have gone far. So who had called her in the dead of night, gotten her to come out, and then taken her away? She was never found. The authority conducted a thorough investigation, but no one seemed to be a suspect. All those who were suspected were later cleared of motive or opportunity. A month after the incident, a security officer from the company went to the police station to report something. This was perhaps the most valuable lead they had received since the case began. He had been in the hospital for surgery at the time of the disappearance, and no one had thought to ask him for information. He said that a few days before my classmate's aunt disappeared, she had come to the office alone at around 8 p.m. one evening. He was on duty at the gate, and she said she had left something in her office and needed to retrieve it. He went about his patrols around the premises, and then he noticed my classmate's aunt sneaking around the back of the office building to a small gazebo. She kept looking around furtively, and he became curious. He hid in the shadows and watched as she took a bunch of papers out of her bag and started burning them. There weren't many papers, so they burned quickly, and she then kicked the ashes away with her foot. She turned and walked away. The man went to the gazebo afterward and saw that only ashes remained. He didn't find anything else. Following the principle of the less you know, the better, he didn't report it. But now that she was missing, he decided to come forward. Since the missing woman was the head of the finance department, and there was this suspicious incident, the company's superiors decided to audit the accounts. But nothing out of the ordinary was found. There were minor discrepancies, of course, but that was to be expected. The case was put on hold indefinitely. By the time we graduated from high school, his aunt was still missing. No one knew where she had gone or where she was buried. Who had called her out on that winter night using the phone at her workplace, and what had she been burning? These were all unsolved mysteries. In the end, my classmate's uncle went to the police station to obtain a death certificate. Someone recently came up with a more reasonable explanation for the old chimney case. They suggested it might have been the result of a bet gone wrong, and when things took a turn, the person involved didn't dare to come forward, so it all ended in confusion. Throughout history, there have always been young people who risk their lives for seemingly trivial things. When it comes to murder, the motives are typically twofold: love or profit. Cases like the Research Institute murder and the mysteriously missing aunt are prime examples of profit-driven crimes. My classmate's father, the head of security at the institute, was a shrewd man, navigating the complex office politics with finesse. Even so, maintaining his position in an environment dominated by intellectuals was no easy feat in such a setting, where academic minds prevailed. Conflicts were often subtle and covert, with elaborate traps laid out over extended periods. Based on the police report, my classmate's father had a nagging suspicion that the deputy director's murder was more than just an act of revenge. He sensed a hidden power struggle at play, with a faction within the institute, long at odds with the deputy director, resorting to this desperate measure. They were well aware of the couple's deep attachment to their son and saw this as an opportunity to strike a devastating blow. And indeed, their plan succeeded. My classmate's father's suspicion centered on the individual who replaced the deputy director, but without concrete evidence, it remained just that, a hunch. In the case of my classmate's aunt, there were rumors that she knew someone secret. When I was young, I found this scary because she was someone I knew who suddenly disappeared. As I grew older, I saw on TV that knowing too many secrets can be dangerous. His aunt was talented but not very good-looking, so even though she became the head of finance, no one gossiped about unspoken rules. In China, these unspoken rules are everywhere but never openly discussed. Admitting to following them is considered shameful, yet many people who do follow them achieve success. In this particular case, rather than getting her position by sleeping with someone powerful, one of the unspoken rules, his aunt earned it through her own effort and talent. If she had been sexually attractive, she might have taken a different path. However, maybe she was too smart for her own good, and that's what led to her downfall. It's hard to say. Later, my classmate told me that his aunt's company went bankrupt, the land was sold, and they turned to real estate development. Just the other day, he passed by and saw they were demolishing the old factory buildings. He couldn't help but think, what if they found a skeleton somewhere there? The killer would probably never be found, but at least his aunt could have a proper burial. Unfortunately, nothing happened. Alright, that's it for this episode of Unresolved Mysteries I've known over the past 30 years. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.